The blue lights hit your rearview mirror before your brain even catches up. 1 second you're just driving, maybe thinking about getting home, maybe distracted by your own thoughts, and the next second your chest tightens just a little. You check your speed. Was I speeding? Did I miss a sign? Why me? You pull over, engine still running, hands suddenly feel awkward, like you don't know where they're supposed to go. The officer steps out of the cruiser, slow, deliberate, watching you the whole time. And now everything you do matters more than you realize. Have you ever been in a traffic stop where you weren't sure what to say, or felt like anything you said could make things worse? Tell me what happened in the comments, because later on I'm going to break down something most drivers completely misunderstand about these moments, and it might change how you handle your next stop. Let me be clear about something right from the start. Most people think traffic stops are simple. You get pulled over, you hand over your license, maybe you get a ticket, maybe you don't, and then you go on your way. That's the version we all want to believe in. But real roadside encounters don't work like that. They're layered. They're psychological. They're full of small decisions that quietly shape what happens next. And yes, sometimes someone who understands the law just a little better than average can shift the entire direction of that interaction. That's where the idea of outsmarting the cops comes in, but not in the way people usually think. It's not about being aggressive, it's not about arguing, and it's definitely not about trying to win against an officer on the side of the road. It's about understanding how the game is actually being played. Picture this. You're pulled over for what the officer claims is a minor traffic violation. Maybe it's a broken taillight. Maybe it's failure to signal. The officer walks up, calm voice, neutral face. Do you know why I pulled you over? That question right there is one of the most misunderstood moments in any traffic stop. Most drivers panic slightly and start guessing. Was I speeding? I might have rolled that stop sign. I'm not sure. What they don't realize is that this question isn't really about getting information. It's about observing behavior. The officer is watching how quickly you speak, how nervous you seem, whether you admit to anything, whether you contradict yourself. In other words, they're building a mental profile of you within seconds. And here's where the first major mistake happens. People think honesty means volunteering everything. It doesn't. There's a difference between being respectful and being self-incriminating. Someone who understands this might respond calmly, "I'm not sure, officer." That's it. No guessing, no rambling, no accidental admissions. And you'd be surprised how often that alone changes the tone of the interaction. Now let's go deeper. Officers are trained to look for inconsistencies. They're trained to ask follow-up questions that seem casual but are actually strategic. Where are you coming from? Where are you headed? How long have you been driving tonight? These sound harmless, almost conversational, but they serve a purpose. They create a timeline. They test your responses. They look for hesitation, contradiction, or over-explanation. Here's where people get themselves into trouble without even realizing it. They start talking too much. Well, I just left my friend's place. We were watching the game. I only had like one drink and then Notice what just happened? The officer didn't ask about alcohol, but now alcohol is in the conversation. That's not bad luck. That's a predictable outcome of pressure. The person who outsmarts the situation isn't the one who talks their way out of it. It's the one who understands when not to talk. But, and this is important, there's a line here. Silence can protect you, but it can also escalate suspicion if handled poorly. If you suddenly go completely silent, refuse to answer anything, and act defensive, the officer's mindset shifts immediately. Now you're not just a routine stop, you're a potential problem. So what does a balanced approach look like? It looks like calm, controlled communication. You provide required documents when asked. You follow lawful instructions. You don't argue on the roadside. But you also don't volunteer unnecessary information. There's a difference between cooperation and compliance with everything, and most people don't understand that difference until it's too late. Let's talk about another moment where things quietly go sideways. The officer takes your license and registration and walks back to the patrol car. Minutes pass. Then more minutes. This feels normal, right? But here's something people rarely think about. Time matters in a traffic stop. An officer is allowed to take reasonable time to handle the purpose of the stop, checking your information, writing a ticket, verifying details. But what happens when that time stretches, when it starts feeling excessive? This is where legal nuance comes in. If the stop extends beyond its original purpose without reasonable suspicion of something else, that can become a problem legally. But here's the catch. On the roadside, you don't argue that. This is another area where people misunderstand what using the law actually means. It doesn't mean confronting the officer in the moment. It means recognizing what's happening, staying composed, and preserving your position for later if necessary. The person who outsmarts the situation isn't the one who says, "You're violating my rights," halfway through the stop. That almost always makes things worse. Instead, it's the person who notices, stays calm, and doesn't give the officer additional reasons to escalate. Now let's talk about one of the most tense moments in any stop. Step out of the vehicle. Your heart rate jumps a little when you hear that. Most people assume this means they've done something seriously wrong. Not necessarily. In many situations, officers are legally allowed to ask drivers to step out of the vehicle for safety reasons. But here's what people don't realize. How you respond to that request matters more than the request itself. If you hesitate, argue, or act confused in a confrontational way, the situation tightens instantly. If you comply calmly, keeping your movements slow and visible, the tension often stays manageable. Again, this isn't about surrendering your rights. It's about understanding timing. There's a difference between asserting rights in court and escalating a roadside interaction. Now here's where things get even more interesting. Sometimes officers will shift tone during a stop. They might start friendly, just a quick question, then suddenly more serious. Is there anything illegal in the vehicle? That shift isn't random. It's a test. They're watching how you react to pressure. Do you laugh nervously? Do you over-deny? Do you get defensive? And this is where one of the most dangerous myths comes in. People think saying no is enough, but how you say it matters. A calm, simple response carries a completely different weight than a rushed, emotional one. And then comes the moment that defines so many of these encounters. Do you mind if I take a look inside the vehicle? That word, mind, is doing a lot of work, because this is where consent enters the picture, and consent changes everything. If you say yes, you've just given permission. The legal landscape shifts instantly. If you say no, respectfully, the officer now has to rely on other legal grounds if they want to proceed. But here's the part most people miss. Refusing consent doesn't mean the stop ends. It often means the officer starts looking harder. Body language changes. Questions get sharper. The air feels heavier. And this is where people crack. They say no, and then immediately start explaining. "I mean, there's nothing in there, I just don't feel comfortable." That explanation, ironically, creates more suspicion than the refusal itself. The person who truly understands the situation keeps it simple. "I don't consent to any searches." Calm, clear, no extra words. That's not aggression, that's precision. Let's shift to something even more subtle. Passengers. Most drivers don't think about how passengers affect a traffic stop, but officers absolutely do. Passengers introduce variables, more people to observe, more potential inconsistencies. Sometimes officers will direct questions to passengers specifically to see if their answers match the driver's. "Where are you guys coming from?" Now imagine the driver said they were coming from work, but the passenger casually mentions a party. That's all it takes. Suddenly the stop has a different tone. And this is why experienced drivers communicate with passengers before anything goes wrong, not during the stop, not under pressure. Because once those lights are on, it's too late to coordinate anything. Now let's talk about something uncomfortable but real. Nervousness. Everyone gets nervous during a traffic stop. That's normal. But officers are trained to distinguish between ordinary nervousness and what they consider excessive nervousness. Shaking hands, avoiding eye contact, over-talking, repeating answers. These things get noticed. And here's the tricky part. You can be completely innocent and still look suspicious. That's why controlling your behavior matters just as much as knowing your rights. Take a slow breath. Keep your movements deliberate. Speak at a normal pace. It sounds simple, but under pressure, it's not. Now here's where the idea of outsmarting becomes very real. It's not about tricking anyone. It's about not making unforced errors. Most traffic stop problems don't come from the original reason for the stop. They come from what happens after. The extra sentence, the unnecessary admission, the nervous overreaction, the poorly timed argument. That's what turns a warning into a citation, or worse. And sometimes it's even smaller than that. Holding your phone, reaching suddenly, interrupting the officer. Tiny things that shift perception. Because in that moment, perception is reality. The officer is constantly asking themselves one question. Is this situation under control? Everything you do answers that question, whether you realize it or not. Let's go back to the idea that someone used the law against them. What does that actually look like in real life? It looks like someone who understands the boundaries of the stop without announcing them. Someone who doesn't consent to searches but doesn't turn it into a confrontation. Someone who answers what they must and nothing more. Someone who recognizes when a stop is extending and doesn't give the officer new reasons to justify it. It's quiet. It's controlled. It's almost invisible. And that's why it works. Because it doesn't trigger escalation. It doesn't give the officer a reason to shift from routine enforcement to investigative mode. Now here's something most people won't tell you. Even when you do everything right, things can still go wrong. Officers are human. Situations are unpredictable. Misunderstandings happen. That's why your goal shouldn't be to win the stop. Your goal should be to get through it without making it worse. There's a difference. And that mindset alone changes how you carry yourself in those moments. Let me paint one more scenario. You're sitting there. The officer comes back after what feels like forever, hands you your documents. Just a warning today, drive safe. That's it. No ticket, no escalation. Now ask yourself, what made that outcome possible? Was it luck? Maybe. But more often than people realize, it's behavior. It's the way you handled the questions, the way you controlled your tone, the way you avoided turning a simple stop into something bigger. And that's the part most drivers never think about until they're already in that flashing light moment again. Because once it happens, everything speeds up. Your instincts take over. And if your instincts are based on myths, panic, or misinformation, that's when mistakes happen. So the real question isn't whether someone can outsmart the cops. It's whether they can stay disciplined when it matters most. Because discipline doesn't look impressive. It doesn't feel dramatic. But in that quiet, tense space on the side of the road, it's the difference between control and chaos. And if you've ever felt that moment, hands on the wheel, heart just a little faster than normal, waiting for the next question, you already know how quickly things can shift.